Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Trustee Learning Programme session from Getting On Board. Today, our session is Fundraising in Tray, which is questions that some of you have submitted as you've booked for this session. And we've got an expert panel here ready to answer your actual real-life conundrums. So we've got some absolutely brilliant questions. Thank you. Before we get into the meat of it, let's just do a bit of housekeeping. So I'm Penny, I'm CEO of Getting On Board. I'm chairing today. You will get access to this recording. We haven't got any slides, so there won't be any slides to send afterwards. The session will go onto YouTube. Please bear that in mind when you're asking questions or making comments, that it is in the public domain. You've been muted on arrival, so please stay muted unless we come to you for a question. That just keeps the sound nice and clear. Closed captions are enabled as standard on all Getting On Board sessions. So if you want the subtitles, please click CC or closed captions on your device. Session content is specific to England and Wales, but to be honest, probably almost everything we're going to talk about today is applicable to any trustee anywhere, but please check if we're referencing anything legal in particular. Please absolutely use the chat to share experiences and to ask questions. Most of the questions we'll take are pre-submitted, but if you have got more questions or comments on what we're talking about, please absolutely feel free to come to put it in the chat, and we might just be able to squeeze some extra questions in. And then finally, a giant thank you to our sponsors, Rathbones Investment Management. It's thanks to them that this session and many others are completely free of charge, so we're very grateful to them. So let's crack on. This session is Fundraising in Tray. It is specifically for trustees, aspiring trustees, and people who work with trustees. It's not for professional fundraisers. So if you are a professional fundraiser in your day job, you're very welcome to be here. But we are assuming that we've got trustees here who don't fundraise in their day job. And that is where we're pitching this, because we think that's where there's a giant gap. Now, I hardly need to say why fundraising is important to trustees. It occupies many, many of us very much of the time. And I think if you've come along, you already know why this session is important. So finally, before I ask the panel to introduce themselves, I just want to talk about how we select questions. So we always get more questions than we can answer in these in-tray sessions. If a question is asked more than once, but in different ways, we will absolutely always pick that category of question. So it might be that you don't hear your specific question, but you hear one very similar. And that's almost been upvoted by many of you asking the same thing. We'll also pick questions that we know have wide relevance to many trustees. And we'll tend not to pick questions which are really specific or feel very niche and might be really useful to you to be answered, but might not be useful to the other 40-odd people in the room today. We also make sure that questions are anonymous. So even if you've given us some specifics, we might have taken them out just to make sure that the questions remain anonymous. So that's all the background. We've got loads of fantastic questions that you've submitted, and thank you for those. And we're going to start off. I'm going to ask the panel to answer this question and to introduce themselves briefly before they answer it. So panel, please tell us who you are, what your particular fundraising expertise is, and what your interest is in terms of trustees and fundraising. So the first question, and this one was one that was asked in many different ways by many different people, is how do we work out where we are best putting our fundraising efforts, i.e. which sorts of fundraising should we be focusing on? And Carol, let's start with you. If you could introduce yourself and tell us how you would answer this question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carol Akiwumi, and I'm a social entrepreneur. It means I just start businesses and organizations that are focused on impact, fixing social problems, but making money as well. Okay. And at the moment, I'm CEO and founder of Money for You, and that's why I've got that background. Now, how do you work out where you're putting your best fundraising efforts? When I thought about this, I didn't think about one particular thing because, like one of my colleagues said, it depends. It depends on who you are, it depends on your organization. But if you're a small charity, I would say the very first thing and the easiest thing you can do is conduct a SWOT analysis. You know, you literally want to understand, first of all, where you are and where you want to go to. And so you want to be looking at your existing donor base, because that will be different, who the volunteers are and what your brand looks like and what kind of resources you have, you know, how limited or how, you know, much they are. And then what kind of materials, marketing wise, because these are the things that you're going to need. Then additionally, just to round up so I can hand over to somebody else, think about the opportunities that your particular organization has. I mean, do you have potential corporate partnerships, perhaps grant opportunities? or are there any online giving trends? And hopefully we can speak about that later on. And then more importantly, what are the threats that you need to mitigate against? You know, like, is there increased competition? Are there changes in government funding? If you can analyze all of your fundraising efforts to see what has worked well and what hasn't, and kind of look at all of those metrics, then research, your target audience, and I think you can then begin to consider like low cost, high impact things like individual giving, peer-to-peer fundraising. And at this point, I'd really like to hand over to somebody else.
Thank you, Carol. Laura, let's come to you. So
Hi,
introduce yourself and tell us your answer to the question.
So hi everyone, I'm Laura. I'm a trustee myself. So until this year, I was a trustee at Getting On Board, which was an immense privilege and wonderful. I'm also a trustee of a medium-sized charity called Bramley Elderly Action in Leeds, and I am a volunteer board member of Yorkshire Netball. So I've got lots of experience of being a trustee and usually being the only trustee or one of very few trustees who's from a fundraising background, because my day job is I run a consultancy in the charity sector that supports organisations specifically with their trust fundraising. And it also works with them around volunteer development. So a lot of my work is trust fundraising in order to employ and support volunteer coordinators and kind of build volunteer programmes. So I guess that's a bit about me. And in terms of the strategy piece, like Carol said, it really depends on your organisation. There's no one size fits all about, those sorts of strategic resourcing decisions that you're going to make because every charity is so different. But I think in addition to having that SWOT analysis and looking at what's working well and what income streams perhaps haven't worked so well for you to date, what I like to do is a bit of an other player analysis. So if you look at your organisation and look at some similar organisations who might be of similar size, similar cause, have a look on the Charity Commission, look at their accounts and see, where are they getting their funding sources from? And one of the things to think about, not just the opportunities, but it's how balanced is your current income portfolio? So if you're getting 90% of it from trusts and foundations, you might want to balance the risk a bit and invest a bit more resource in some of the income streams. And it's easy for me to say that because I don't know much about the other income streams, which is why I'm very glad that I'm on this panel with other people who are experts in those.
Thank you, Laura. Louise, let's come to you.
Hi there, I'm a major donor specialist, so I work across the charity sectors, helping charities build confidence raising money with high net worth individuals. I'm also a trustee like Laura, and I've got a private sector background from Unilever early in my career. Just to pick up on what Laura and Carol were saying, nothing too much new, Penny. What's already worked? How have you brought your money in to date? It's easy to focus on what we're not doing. And whilst you don't want all your eggs in one basket, as Laura was saying, you want to diversify. Actually, is there anything that's working well that you can expand upon? Sometimes setting up an income stream completely from scratch does take investment and it's hard to do on a shoestring. And what relationships have you already got in place? Now, that might be a founder who's stepped back. That might be an ex-fundraiser who's interested in volunteering and still being involved, but working out from what you already have and some of those relationships that might be linked to fundraising can be really helpful as well to help you ultimately have a bit of a plan. Because knowing where to put your best fundraising efforts, I don't like to use the word strategy because I sometimes think that can overcomplicate it and people think, oh, this big complicated strategy, but really a plan. What is already working you're going to continue doing? What are you going to try out that's new that you can maybe do tactically? Without a fundraising plan, it's really easy to swing from, we saw this charity do this, let's do a bit of digital, or don't we need a regular giving product? Let's do a bit of that. And that can be really hard for small organizations, I think, and even for larger, actually. I work with charities of all sizes. So I think having a plan is really critical.
Thank you, Louise. And Andrew.
I'm Andrew Barton. I'm also a trustee of two medium-sized charities raising between 1 and 2 million, and I'm also a trustee of an entirely volunteer-led charity that's raising about £75,000 a year and has never spent a penny on marketing, which perhaps leads into my observation about fundraising efforts, which is I always like to look at the assets that we've got in an organisation, especially networks that have already been touched on. But some charities have got, you know, a physical place where you deliver your services, and thinking creatively about how you use that as an asset for your fundraising, I think is a big help. In terms of my background, 19 years fundraising, mainly worked in large international development organisations, and in the last 7 years I've been a freelancer doing a lot of fundraising strategy, but also writing a lot of cases for support for organisations.
Great, thank you. So next question, that was really interesting, thank you. Next question is, how can we set sensible fundraising targets for staff and check that they are met? Who might like to attack this one first? Louise, you're absolutely gagging to go with this one. I can see you.
I'm so keen on this topic. I think it's one that charities need to raise money, and a lot of you will be under a lot of pressure to bring that money in. So we think target money, tell a fundraiser what to raise. Targets have to be bottom up. If you have fundraisers, or if you're doing the fundraising, they must come from the fundraisers. This doesn't mean they're going to give themselves an easy ride. Trust me, there is a huge challenge in the sector with targets coming top down. They're not realistic. They're what the organization wants or needs, but they're not what can be raised. So that was one thing I would say is bottom up, not top down. Secondly, have a pipeline. A lot of you will be very familiar with pipelines from your private or public sector, whatever your own work background is. This is absolutely no different. If you don't know where that money's coming from, there's no point in having the aspiration to increase by 50% or increase by 25% or increase by 30%. And that's the common way that targets are set. So when I mean a pipeline, actually, who are all the trusts and foundations you're applying to, and what is the likelihood of each of them coming to fruition? If you have got 20 people who are giving regularly, what does that look like if 2 of them drop off and you get 5 new people, for example, and building it up from that base. And I will finish there.
Brilliant. I mean, yeah, great insights there. Who wants to come in next on this one? Carol. You're on mute, Carol.
Really important what Louise said. This isn't really answering that. This is more inspiring you, because for some people, I've noticed, especially in this culture, when they have targets, they freeze. People find it really difficult to ask. And the one thing I say to all of my team and everybody who has to ask, and even my trustees, is if you don't ask, you don't get. It's a simple adage, but it holds immense power in the world of fundraising, because opportunity lies in the ask. Many potential donors are just waiting to be approached. You know, they may be interested in supporting your cause, but might not know or haven't been directly asked. So by making the ask, you open the door for them to contribute and make a difference. The other thing also is there's a power in yes. You'll never know what a donor might be willing to give to you until you ask. Some might even surprise you with their generosity. Because let's face it, giving does make us feel good. It's good for our health. It's been scientifically proven. And even a small donation will add up, you know, so every yes brings you closer to achieving your fundraising goals. And of course, what you want to do is shift mindsets. If you ask, you reframe the situation from a passive hope for donations to a proactive pursuit of support. So it will demonstrate your commitment to securing the resources that you need. And people will respect that, you know, because you're all about fulfilling your mission, you're all about making a positive impact, and in the process, the act of asking actually initiates a conversation with a potential donor that opens the door to the 3 R's in fundraising, and that's relationship. So, yep, please ask, because if you don't ask, you don't get.
And would you say, Carol, that assuming a sensible fundraising target has been set with Louise's, you know, look at bottom up and pipeline, make it realistic, do you think we should be public with our targets? What are the kind of what are the pluses and the minuses? Because you're talking about it's very positive to tell people that you've got a fundraising need.
Listen, if you want to be, I have no issues with being public. You know, we actually have an income generation target. We don't use fundraising for all sorts of reasons, because I think we should be really, you know, less dependent on voluntary income, but that's another matter. And we are very open with our own, you know, strategy. We want people to know, the team know at the beginning of the year how much we're all collectively raising together. Because, you know, if everyone knows, then we're moving in the same direction. We actually celebrate it at every team meeting. We make business development part of everyone's role. You know, it may not be your direct responsibility, but at least we're expecting you to keep an eye out and to actually seize opportunities when you find them. So yes, by all means, make them public if you're comfortable with that. And if you're not, well, that's another matter entirely, but I have absolutely no issues with that.
And that's interesting, actually, that you've talked about a shared fundraising target. And I'm going to come to Laura or Andrew about this, because the thing that I heard in this question was, how can we set fundraising targets for staff? And my hackles went up a bit about, well, really, it's an organisational target, isn't it? Laura, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think as a fundraiser, my heart sank a bit to read that, because the question did read a little bit like, how can we make sure that fundraiser is working really hard and we are completely micromanaging them? And I know others have said this, so I won't labour the point, but I mean, you know, I'm in quite a lot of fundraising networks, and we have a real crisis in the sector at the moment with fundraiser burnout and fundraisers leaving the charity sector because they can earn more and have less pressure working in Aldi than being a fundraiser. So it's a huge, huge crisis at the moment. And a lot of what people are saying when they talk about their reasons for leaving the sector is a toxic work culture that largely comes from trustee pressure. So it's something that's kind of worth thinking about, whether unintentionally you're creating an environment that isn't supporting and getting the best out of your fundraiser. I'd say for me that sometimes, especially in small charities, especially if there's few staff or no staff, the boundaries between the strategic and the operational can get very, very blurry. And that's something I think about in my trusteeship as a fundraiser all the time. And I think that the way that I try to think about it is that the trustees are responsible for fundraising. They have that strategic responsibility. But if you're lucky enough to have an expert fundraiser, you know, who's a paid member of staff, they are the expert. So they will always have more knowledge about this than you will, even though you feel it's your responsibility. So I think that target should be set by the expert, what they feel is achievable. And the trustee's role is to provide support and guidance and a good environment around that, not be breathing down their neck, I think. I don't know if that's answered the question, Penny.
Yeah, it has. It's really helpful. Thank you. Andrew, I'm going to throw the next question at you, because I think we're kind of moving in that direction already. And the question was, how can I best influence the work of the fundraising officer on the high-level fundraising that will bring the most return while recognising that small-scale donations still matter?
Wow. I think I would ask people to kind of think about the word support rather than influence. And one of the best ways that you can support in a small organization is really thinking about your networks, because if you've got a very small donor base, you're probably going to have to find the major donors from scratch. And the people who've got a link with you as a group of trustees, as well as interest in your cause, is crucial. And I'm sure Louise might want to say some more about that. Yeah, I think and when it comes to small scale donations, you want to be thinking obviously about whether you can start building a support base that are really committed to your cause, that you can obviously go back and either encourage regular giving or serial one-off gifts.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just posting the question in the chat because it was a bit long and I had a few different bits.
Yeah.
Louise, your thoughts on this question?
I think influencing the work of the fundraising officer is interesting. I think the best question a trustee can ask, if you have a paid fundraiser or even a volunteer fundraiser, is what can we do to support you? What do you need from us? I had a trustee ask me that in a board meeting about 10 years into my fundraising career, and I was so bowled over I didn't even have the answer. And I had a lot of fundraising experience by then. it is, as has been touched on before, organisational wide. I think that mix of high level, maybe larger gifts or larger funds, and then the smaller scale donations that have been discussed about is linked to having a plan. Actually, what's working already? What are you trying to grow? What's going to take a bit longer? And having a plan also includes non-immediate fundraising coming in. I've worked with a charity recently that spoke to me and said they wanted major donor support. They were not in a position, they didn't have a CRM, and they really wanted to get a CRM. The CEO and the fundraising director were so passionate, and they were fortunate they had a head of fundraising, a fundraising director, but there was so much going on in the organization. They needed a basic plan. They needed to know what they were doing with their comms. They needed to know what they were doing with trustees, with stuff, before they even got to a stage of, okay, let's grow some higher level gifts. So I think having those priorities, and again, it doesn't have to be a complicated plan, but basic, what are you trying to achieve this year? And linking that to the whole organization. Fundraising does not sit alone over here. What you need to achieve, what you want to achieve as an organization is absolutely integral to this. Yeah.
Thank you. And Tony's asked a really good follow-on question in the chat, which is how best can small charities diversify their fundraising bases with limited resources? Who might like to tackle that one? Andrew, you look poised.
Well, it is clearly different for different organisations. So if I talk about the little charity that I'm a trustee of, which we're raising about £70,000 a year. It's we started off with a church that was funding this street children's project in the Philippines, and we diversified by getting 3 or 4 churches, and we get money from the churches. Individuals within those churches have then given us money, and people that have come out to see the work have then been bowled over by it and have talked to their networks, and we've got one major gift that's come from that. People have ended up making in memoriam gifts, and there's obviously a rich seam of community fundraising. So that's a kind of very organic diversification strategy. I think the kind of charity you are does make a difference. If you are very tangible and it's easy to kind of get what you do, that's probably more amenable to more smaller gifts, mass marketing. If you're in the kind of organization that is enabling other people, and the kind of what you do needs a bit more explanation, it's probably going to orientate itself much more towards philanthropic giving, just because it's really, really difficult to write a Facebook ad for what you're doing.
And I love your church example, Andrew, because what struck me about that is actually you back to your point about assets. You've got this single kind of asset, and diversifying is kind of just pumping the same asset rather than saying, actually, and now we're going to write some grant applications over here. But actually, you've led to other forms of fundraising by pursuing the thing that you've already got because it's working. So that was a really powerful example. Thank you.
And we've even managed, by having a really good website, which my daughter designed for us, we must have done something right, because we have had a couple of completely unsolicited trust donations, which have clearly come about because we write a decent annual report and the website looks decent, and people have kind of backed us. So don't be frightened of being small. I think small is beautiful in many ways when it comes to charity fundraising.
Yeah, I can see some claps from participants here. Yeah, I mean, most of us are trustees in small charities, aren't we? That's just the nature of our sector. Louise.
Penny, I just add to that, all of Andrew's example was perfect and just brilliantly to demonstrate it does take resource. You cannot grow that. Now, that doesn't have to be paid resource, but they've got Andrew. He's a specialist fundraiser with decades of experience. I had a volunteer trust and bid writer fundraiser in a workshop I was doing the other week. She is on fire. She's getting loads of success. She goes, well, I don't want to be a fundraiser. I was like, but you're doing it on a voluntary basis and you're doing it very well. So wherever you get, it will take resource and it will take time. And I think the challenge is, how can you, as a small organization that you don't have actual investment in terms of pounds, still get that resource? Because it is a magic wand, unfortunately, that we don't have here for you to just kind of magic up lots of diversified income streams. So for me, I'd be thinking about who is in the network. And if you're a community organization, which lots of small charities are, and a lot of you will be, who is in the community, who's volunteering already, who might want to get more involved, who already knows and loves you, and using that, let them be the decider. Sometimes I think we're so worried about asking for more. We couldn't ask for them to do this because they've already helping here. Let them decide that. If people are already invested in you as a charity, a lot of people often want to do more or will do more if you give them that chance, and that can help with that resource challenge and basically get a fundraiser on your board, which
Brilliant.
getting on board can help with hugely.
Brilliant. And actually back to Carol's thing about if you don't ask, you don't get. So let's move on, because we've still got quite a number of questions here. And the next question is, what is the best kind of fundraiser to employ? And I guess for most of us don't have fundraisers, and we only dream of having a fundraiser. So, you know, we're lucky enough to have the resource to employ a fundraiser. It's a lot of pressure, isn't it? You know, we're thinking about, well, what kind of person should we employ? I'm going to ask just one or two of you to answer this. Who might like to come in with some thoughts on this one? Carol, you're muted, Carol.
Sorry, I keep doing that, don't I? Let me just give you my experience as, you know, a CEO of a small charity. The best kind of fundraiser to employ is the one you can afford. Full stop. But having said that, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. You know, you have to carefully analyze your needs, your resources, and your long-term goals to find the person, the individual or individuals who can effectively champion your cause and propel your efforts forward, because that's what you're trying to do. So beyond full-time staff, what you might want to consider is a part-time fundraiser, you know, because that might be cost-effective option for you. You may want to consider consultancy services, and we do that. You know, we have business development consultants, because with limited resource, I would always go for the best person my money can buy. It's, you know, I don't have the luxury of having a team of people at different stages. I need somebody who can get us quick wins. And very often it's consultants for different things. But of course, somebody also mentioned volunteers. Don't underestimate the power of passionate volunteers who can assist with various fundraising activities. And as much as possible, when you're trying to recruit trustees, always write in the business development aspect. And look for a fundraiser if you can, or look for people who are willing to actually chip in, you know, with their own money and their own networks. Okay, now, the best kind of fundraiser, let's assume you're privileged and you do have the budget, you know, to go for it. The things I'd be looking for, because I have also hired people for larger teams, is people with skills and experience, and that's what you want to be looking for. Beyond that, you also want to look for a cultural fit. I say this, and when we say cultural fit, for us, that's important because of the audience we deal with. But in other situations, it would actually be a connection to the cause. Because what you don't want is a long learning curve. I mean, somebody who doesn't like animals will find it very difficult to, you know, even if they're looking for a job. And we always say, how do you marry that? Passion and, you know, and dedication. Passion always wins because it shines through. Now, in today's day and age, I would also be looking for somebody who has networks and connections. You know, a strong one, especially in the community or the sector, will be invaluable for opening doors and attracting new donors where possible. Remember, this is for those who have the budget. You want to be thinking about that. And of course, you want people who have the right attitude. Always hire for attitude, because you can teach skills, but attitude you cannot replace. And so you want somebody who's hungry, you know, to win, who's got, you know, like a winning mentality. They're adaptable, they want to learn, and also they have good tech skills, because in today's day and age, a data-driven approach is no longer optional.
It's 17 hours.
Okay.
Laura, can I just thank you, Carol? Loads of practical tips there. Brilliant. Laura, I want to come to you from a for a follow-up question from Carol's comment about using, because we've talked about, yes, you might employ a member of staff, but actually it could be consultants, it could be volunteers, it could be trustee with fundraising experience. I just want to come to you on the consultant point, because you are a fundraising consultant, you're not the only one in this room, and your thoughts on what are the best ways to find and choose a fundraising consultant, kind of taking Carol's points as read. What are the other specific points around using a fundraising consultant?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I mean, I would say this, I'm biased, I am a fundraising consultant, but I think that something really useful if you're starting from scratch, a fundraising consultant can do is, like Andrew offers, come in and do that analysis and build your fundraising case for support, perhaps get you set up on your database. All of that stuff that is still fundraising that needs to happen before you can fundraise effectively, which takes expertise and a bit of resource. And perhaps they can offer some training so that your staff and volunteers have got that knowledge to really take it forward. But it, you know, the right option is different for each charity. And other charities, you might need that full-time person to really dedicate themselves. If your cause is quite complex, for example, and requires a bit of explaining and isn't, you know, that kind of easy heartstring cause, having somebody full-time on staff to really immerse themselves might be easier for you. I know you want to ask me about how to find consultants, but I wanted to quickly circle back to a point about using volunteers in fundraising as well, because my main expertise is volunteer management. So I've worked in volunteering and volunteer strategy and been training in that as an area for 20 years. And I became a fundraiser because I had to fundraise for my job and other volunteer managers, expanding programs. And a bit as we alluded to before, fundraising should be a shared responsibility amongst the board, amongst staff and amongst volunteers. I'd be really wary actually of using volunteers purely to fundraise, because there's a real ethical quandary there about it being job substitution. So the same way that you wouldn't ask a plumber to come round and then you wouldn't pay them because they're volunteering, I'd be really careful about asking somebody to offer something that's a highly skilled paid job as a volunteer. But you can use good volunteer management practices to get around that. So sharing the role amongst lots of volunteers, providing support, having a fundraising committee so that you don't have one person essentially on a 0-hour contract delivering a job role for you for free. So yeah, there's something to think about there. But in terms of where to find good consultants, there are absolutely loads of brilliant fundraising consultants out there. There are lots of different day rates as well. There's a whole range. And with more and more people offering that remotely as well, it doesn't, you know, you've got a better chance of finding somebody from anywhere in the country. It doesn't have to be somebody who's kind of local to you. So I think there's some great groups out there that kind of advertise consultants. So there's places like Consultants for Good, there's Fair Collective, NCBO has its own kind of bank of consultants. And then there will be agencies, you know, like Bloom and Eastside People. If you just have a bit of a Google, you will stumble upon, you know, lots and lots of different networks of consultants. And if you ask amongst your networks as well, who other organisations you know have worked with and get some recommendations, I think that's a good place to start as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. I'm going to move us on because we've still got loads to crack through here. Andrew, I'd like to pose this one to you. And the question asked was, how can we fundraise for core costs? Now, I'd like you to start by telling us what core costs are, just so that, you know, it's quite a charity sector specific term. So tell us what core costs are, and then please answer the question, how can we fundraise for them?
I sort of interpret core costs as what you need to sort of keep the engine running, as distinct from the specific project or program activities that you do. And I think my honest answer is, I think it's a bit of a dangerous construct. So again, if I go back to my kind of church background, nobody gives money for the gas bill or for painting the building or any of that stuff. You fundraise pretty much everything unrestricted, but purely by selling the vision of kind of what we're here for and the identity that people have. So I worry about the idea of fundraising for core costs, because it almost makes it causes people to kind of reduce down in this very reductive way to kind of, will you help fund the gas bill, which no one's going to get up and fund, you know, the gas bill, or a staff member even, you know. It's I think you've just got to kind of reframe the question and start in a different place.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists want to add anything quickly onto that one about core costs?
I just wanted to add that if you have a compelling case for support, and I'll come back for a case for support, it will be so much easier to raise money for your whole organisation than those of you doing trust and foundation fundraising may know that sometimes they want something restricted or new and shiny. And what I mean by case for support is, how would you persuade someone, say compellingly, in a paragraph, if you're at the bar, if you're at a pub, if you're at a dinner party, what you do and why you're needed? And that is often missing, because it can be a bit of a challenge. A really good case for support really gets to the heart of why you exist as a charity, why you need to be there, and what are you doing to meet that need. So I've done case for support work with organisations that are then going through a strategy review, because actually why they were in existence and the needs for society that they were meeting have changed. So again, this comes back to fundraising not being over here and it being like a proposal and the rest of the organisation over here. If you are confident in that, you don't even have to be talking about core costs or unrestricted or the gas bill, because all of those things, the gas bill, the lights, even if you don't have an office, the cost for volunteers to come and help at an event, all of that is enabling you to have the impact you're doing, you know, to feed kids before breakfast, if it's a breakfast club locally, to enable people who've got mental health challenges to do gardening, if you're a local gardening club. It's all in a one. The public generally don't understand that. And so it's really hard if you're doing public fundraising. People don't really understand the need to invest in a fundraiser, the need to invest in some of that back office. So I'm not saying you hide it, but you don't need to go into all of that detail of the different bills and the core costs. It's really dry, right? Core costs, no one's going to give to that. What they will give is to your organization as a whole, if you can really simply and compellingly explain what you do. And often it is not simple to get to that stage, but it is worth the time investment.
And actually, I really think, Louise, you made me think about us as individual trustees and how we have to be able to have that ready at our fingertips, don't we? In terms of if we're stuck in the lift with somebody and we get on to talking about the fact we're a trustee at X charity, can we share something in 60 seconds about why are we excited about the charity's work? And I think for the 50 people in the room today and people watching on YouTube afterwards, if we can't do that about the charity that we're a trustee of, we should go away and make sure we can go away and put some work into being able to do that.
Absolutely. And if you can't, you know, stories are the most powerful, memorable way. You know, tell an anecdote. It can be anonymized. If you don't know one, get out there as a trustee. Make sure you do know one, or make sure that if there are staff, that there are examples, experiences, as I said, even if they're anonymized, because that is the most compelling way. It's not the only element of a case for support, but it's needed. And it's also, Penny, when you're in those moments, what struck you in the last year about being a trustee? A story of someone that your charity has supported will stick with someone. A load of facts won't.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to whiz us on. Now, the next question is coming Laura's way, and this could be this is courses that last for days and years and master's degrees, but we're going to ask Laura to answer it in a couple of minutes because we're mean like that. And the question that came in is, what makes a successful grant application?
Yeah, you're right. There could be entire kind of year-long programs on this, and I'm sure others on the call know lots about this as well. But I think a successful grant application, first of all, it's all of that kind of stuff that you need to have in place first. So as Louise has said, you need a really compelling case for support. So if you've got that kind of structure in there already, that will make all of your kind of trust fundraising not only higher quality in terms of what you're writing, but it'll make you more efficient because you can write more bids and get them out of the door more quickly. Alongside that, what's really helpful is to have really detailed prospect research. So I think often when charities approach me for trust fundraising support, they don't know who they're asking for funding, they don't know why they're asking, and they don't know what they do. So what I often do with organisations, first of all, is a really detailed piece of prospect analysis. So I'll spend time looking at all of the trusts and foundations that are out there and disqualify anybody who, you know, they wouldn't fund. So there's going to be, amongst the 20,000 possible options of trusts out there to fund your organisation, a tiny percentage would actually be warm to you. So if you can go through that process and have your pipeline of who would fund you first, which takes a bit of time, but that's something that a consultant can help you with quite quickly, then you know who is going to fund you, and that's one part of the puzzle. And that case for support work helps you, you know, with that why should they fund you? And it also helpfully writes most of your application for you, because most funders will ask you questions that directly come from your case support. So things like, you know, who are you working with? What problems are they facing? Why you and your organisation over another competitor? You should have a lot of information about those particular answers in your case for support already. And I suppose the other thing that is really helpful, you know, is to just, you know, unfortunately, trust fundraising is really competitive. So last year, 8% on average grant applications were successful. And, you know, this is kind of from national research. And so what you're trying to do with your grant applications is get that 8% as high as possible, give yourself and your organisation kind of the best shot. And so that might be things like making sure there's fresh and compelling stories and quotes in there from the people that your organisation is working with. You know, investing time to make sure that you are kind of updating your knowledge about the programme or what it is that you're delivering, and constantly spending time kind of fine-tuning those kind of tools that you've got. Another big element of it is it's not just simply filling in a form, which is kind of how people who come to it fresh assume you just fill in a form, you send it off, you get loads of money, it's great. It's still relationship fundraising. So a big part of trust fundraising work is to build a relationship with a potential funder, you know, speak to staff and sometimes volunteers. If it's a very small fund, it will be entirely volunteer run as well. You know, build those relationships with staff and volunteers over time. And, you know, get to know them so that they can get to know your work. And if you are successful, that leads straight into your stewarding relationship. So keeping that relationship warm and going with that funder so that when you want to ask them in 12 months' time for a little bit more of a gift, then that relationship is there. I'm sure there's things I've missed if other people want to add anything as well.
Thank you, Laura. I thought that was very good for a short answer to get so much in. Blanche has asked about recommendations of sources, of listings, and I wondered if Laura, if we can give you a task to pop any, not necessarily links, but names of any resources that you'd recommend in the chat. Is that okay with you? Brilliant. Rather than asking you to think on the spot. I'm going to move us on, even though we've probably got lots more to say about grants fundraising. And I guess that Laura made a really interesting point as well about keeping funders happy. And I'm guessing that runs right across all different types of funders. That isn't just grant makers, the people that are actually funding us, making sure that we've got that relationship with them. Let's move on to the next question that was submitted, which is for Carol. How do we attract donations online? And again, such a massive topic. But Carol, if you could give us a few tips on this.
Okay, so the internet is our best friend when it comes to attracting donations online. Since the pandemic, really, it's become more of a powerful platform for attracting donations. And there are a number of things that we can do. You know, basically, we can optimize our online presence and we can engage our audiences. Those two things, really. In terms of optimizing our online presence, just cast your mind back to something that Andrew talked about in terms of whatever his daughter did for their website. I mean, I would say focus on your donation page. Honestly, there should be a big, bright donation button on your front page. It doesn't need to be black or gray or anything like that. Make sure it's red or orange, you know, they work. Make it easy to find on your website. Make sure that there's a clear call to action. Don't put barriers. If somebody wants to donate, and I often, you know, get really antsy about this with my team, don't make them go through 2 or 3 or 4 hoops just to get to the point where they want to give to you. So make sure it's seamless. The process is seamless. But of course, balance that with making sure that the payment gateway is secure and, of course, mobile responsive, because a lot of people are now, you know, engaging with us on their mobiles. Now, aside from that, you want to also leverage social media effectively, share inspiring content like stories of your service users, program updates, volunteer experiences. People love that. Use social media fundraising features like Facebook donate buttons and donation campaigns. If somebody starts a donation for you, and you should encourage this, for people's birthdays, make sure you try to amplify that. Just a simple like is good. Then run targeted ads to reach new audiences who might be interested in your cause. Consider using Google Ad Grants for this. Google Ad Grants is free for charities. If you don't have it, you should get it like yesterday and use it. Honestly, it's free advertising. You get $10,000 per month. That's a lot. It gives you increased visibility. It helps you to reach the right audience. Honestly, it's a fantastic tool. And then, of course, you want to start building a strong email list, monthly or quarterly, whatever it is. You want to make sure you're putting out newsletters, and in there you're putting in like impact reports, event updates, all of those things. The other thing you can do is segment your email list to make sure that you're personalizing the communication to different specific targets of your donor base, with relevant messages. Not everybody needs to be hearing about the same thing all the time. Craft those email campaigns. Use MailChimp. That's a really effective way of doing that. And then something I think Andrew mentioned was SEO. That's search engine optimization. I suspect that's probably what your daughters helped. And that's really helping your website to be more optimized with the right content and relevant keywords that improve your search engine ranking. I tell my team, even though there are so many money for yous in the world, the minute you type money for you and spell it anyhow, we're number one. We come up first, and that's easy to achieve, okay? Because it will increase the chances of potential donors finding out about you and the kind of people that you want to draw on. I'll just finish by saying, look, there's so many ways you can engage your audience. You can encourage your supporters to create their own fundraising pages, but provide them with the resources and templates to make it successful. You can partner with companies or other people who can match the gifts. Go for recurring donations. Honestly, fun fact, target religious donors if you can. I mean, target everyone. You want people to give to you regularly. Most people on average will give to you for 7 years before they cancel a small direct debit. Religious donors is twice that, 14 years. They'll give up their Costa coffee before they give up the direct debit to you. So that's a really good to get recurring donors, and donations from some of these places. And of course, do all the other things that people do. Have live streaming events, cause marketing partnerships where you collaborate with brands that align with your mission. At the end of the day, though, do use data. Try to make data-driven decisions. Track your online fundraising results, and every single platform will have analytics tools to help you understand what's working and what needs improvement. The one thing you should do always is an A/B test. For every single thing you send out, send 2 different subject lines, see the one that does better. And that's automated on most platforms now, and then that's the one you send out. So much we could do. It's, a whole day's training, but yeah, hopefully that was helpful.
Amazing. Thank you, Carol. So many tips there. And I think, again, lots of lessons for different sorts of fundraising as well, like look at what works and what doesn't work and then adapt accordingly. I'm just going to read out, thank you, Laura, for going off and telling us some of the fundraising where you can find out about different grants. I'm going to read them out for people who don't like the chat and also for people that are watching afterwards. So in order to find funding sources, see DSC, which is the Directory of Social Change, Grants Online, Funds Online, Funding Scotland, Charity Excellence Framework, your local community foundation, your local council for voluntary service or equivalent, and have a look at the Charity Commission website, which you can filter down by funding organisations that provide grants to other grants. So thank you, Laura. Louise, we're going to make you do exactly the same as we just made Laura and Carol do. We're sharing the love here. We've had a question which is, how can we attract major donors? And again, this is days worth of learning here that people can sign themselves up for. Give us your couple of minutes on what people can do in terms of major donors, and how do we define major donors?
I'll give it a go. Major donor would be any gift with an individual motivation that is larger than average. So a major gift could be £500 or it could be 50 grand. First question, should you or are you at the right stage to be looking at major donor fundraising? If you can't answer the questions that Laura talked about for the case for support and that we discussed earlier, don't do it. Because those are the first kind of questions I'm going to be asking is, if you're having a discussion with me about me maybe donating £5,000 or £10,000 or £50,000, is what do you need it for? What impact is it going to have? And that doesn't have to be restricted, but if you can't answer the obvious questions, don't go down this route. Secondly, scrap the rich lists. I think we are so passionate about our causes, and you are all amazing. You know, all of you are trustees, and you're giving up your time for free all the time in your trustee role, and now again on this session to learn for the causes. That can lead to a real kind of passion that you get the cause. Well, they've got money, they should get the cause. But it is absolutely independent choice whether somebody chooses to give their wealth away and to who. It's exactly the same thing as me saying to Penny, you have to give £20 to children in need on the Friday evening. And Penny goes, but I don't want to because I support this other local children. No, you have to. Well, maybe I want to give £5. No, you have to give £20 to children in need. We wouldn't do that to each other, yet sometimes in this area of wealth and larger gifts, we assume because someone has wealth, they should give money to us. Wealth is just one aspect of why somebody might give. The rich lists are filled with people who are wealthy, but they don't know your cause. They may never know your cause. They may not have an interest in your cause. So think beyond the money. And it's really hard when there's pressure on money, but you have to take a relationship first approach to that. So the theme that's kind of been running through this is people. Andrew gave the example of how his very small church community, they now have a major donor. It is linked to everything else that you're doing. Some of your volunteers are likely to be high net worth. You may or may not know that. If you're doing digital work that Carol's talked about, a proportion of those new givers are likely to be high net worth. So think about it in its broadest sense, and that can really help. Trustees can play a role. I've never known anybody that says they know someone who's high net worth, but I'm a trustee of a really small charity, and I encouraged a couple of my local contacts to do a cycle ride. One of them raised £8,000 through the cycle ride, which for us as a small organisation was massive because he got match funding through his company, and I sent a thank you note around his house. Turns out he's actually got quite a lot of wealth, judging from his home. So I wouldn't say I know anybody who's particularly wealthy, yet that ended up happening, and it raised considerably more for my charity than if I hadn't gone out to my networks. So my best advice is, if you're a smaller organisation, is don't get hung up on the amount. Of course you want that magic $250,000 or that magic 100,000, but equally, wouldn't it be amazing if you got that magic £8,000 that wasn't in existence before, or even £800? So if you can take it away from the money, focus on the people, focus on the relationships, and focus on having conversations with more people, which comes back to our elevator pitches. The more people in your community, the more people you talk to about your cause, the more conversations that happen, the more good things come your way. And sometimes it's not a personal gift, sometimes it's in Laura's realm. So actually, have you thought about X, Y, or Z Foundation? Oh, I don't know. They're unsolicited. They don't normally accept applications, but this person knows somebody, who means that you can then submit an application. So not having any preconceived kind of expectations that someone should or will give, and going in it open can really, really help.
Lovely, thank you. And I guess a point for every fundraiser who's heard, or every charity CEO who's heard, why don't you just ask Richard Branson if he'd give us some money, or Elon Musk? You know, it's like that moment, isn't it?
It is. And I have a view on that, which is, we find it easier as humans. There are a lot of trustees who say, please write to this person and write to that person. It's not going to cut through. It can be the most beautifully crafted letter in the world, but how many messages and emails are people getting? So actually, why do we do it? Well, because we don't like to talk about money. It feels really uncomfortable. Take it away from the money and actually find out what this person is interested in, what their passions are, what keeps them up at night about the world. It might not be you, it might be climate change or something completely different from your cause. But that makes it all so much more enjoyable and more comfortable. And it will stop you going off track to the Richard Branson's penny, because people do that, in my opinion, because it's further away, so it feels easier. It's a waste of time, and you are all short of time, I'm sure, in your organisation. So definite hard no on the Richard Branson asks.
I think building on what Louisa said, the question when thinking about in a trustees meeting is not which wealthy people do you know, but who do you know that might be interested in what we do. And then to just break it down and think about the different segments of life that people are in, just to make it more manageable. Because I know Louise would say, otherwise the sort of blank, look comes over most trustees' faces if you ask the question, what wealthy people do you know? It's just much better to focus on who do you think would be interested in what we do.
I love that. Thank you. We've got 5 more minutes, and I need a couple of minutes at the end to wrap up. So I'm going to move into our final question. And panel, if you could keep your answers to a minute or less, that would be very marvellous. Thank you. And the question is, what is your one quick fire top fundraising tip to trustees of smaller charities? Andrew, let's come to you first.
I think just the fact that as a small charity, think what you've got, not thinking about all the things you haven't got. So think what you've got, and small is beautiful. You've got so many advantages over the steamships of the big beasts of the charity jungle.
Lovely, thank you.
And yes, terrible mixed metaphor, by the way.
But actually, that came up in some of the questions that we haven't been able to take, which was about how do we compete with big boys? How do we compete with the big charities? So I love that. Louise, what's your top tip for trustees?
Love Andrew's. Yeah, you don't compete, you go a different way. So yeah, completely echo that. I think mine would be focus on people, not money. You'll raise more, and that's really difficult to do when you're under pressure to fund, and it takes trustees and it takes leadership to do that, to focus on the number of meetings you're having. We talked about kind of KPIs earlier and targets, to focus on the number of applications going out, the quality of them that Laura was talking about, the experience that people will get when they give, because then you keep people for longer, you keep funders for longer, and you grow. So if you actually focus on the experience people have, you will raise more than focusing just on the money.
Thank you. Laura?
Mine might be a slightly contentious one, but I think it's always easier to make a fundraising ask if you yourself have already given. So I'm on a direct debit with all the charities that I'm on a board of, within what I can afford. And I find that incredibly empowering when I'm asking other people to give to Bramley Elderly Action or to Getting on Board, because I'm already doing it. I'm not telling somebody to do something that I'm not doing myself. And I think for a lot of trustees, that might not be affordable, but it is much easier to ask someone else to give if you put your money where your mouth is, and you have as well.
Thank you, Laura. And I guess, we're talking about, it might be £5 a month for one person, it might be a lot more for another. We're talking about within our means, aren't we? Now, I'm coming to Carol last, because when we were in our green room before this session, Carol told us that she had so many tips she didn't know what to do with herself. So Carol, you have got a full 2 minutes to share your tips with us.
That's too much pressure, because I know you need 2 minutes to wrap up. So I'm going to keep it to 1 minute. My top tip, because I had to think about it, is really think of fundraising as an invitation. And this goes back to something that I learned a few years ago that completely changed the way I fundraise. It came from a Dutch priest, a professor, author, and theologian who's well known for his compassionate approach to spirituality and social justice, somebody called Henri Nouwen. Some of you may have heard of him. Yeah, and he had these powerful quotes that I saw that shook me to my core. It was, fundraising is precisely the opposite of begging. For me, that offers a refreshing perspective on fundraising, because it transforms it from a reluctant plea to a confident invitation. Basically, you're focusing on value here, and you're shifting people's mindsets. Begging implies scarcity and desperation. It kind of positions you with your hand outstretched, solely focused on what you need. Fundraising as an invitation, on the other hand, emphasizes abundance and opportunity. You present a compelling vision of the positive change that you can create, and then you invite others to join you in making that a reality. So what you don't want to do, is emphasize on your need for financial support. Yes, that may be the fact, but instead, you want to start showcasing the positive impacts of people's contributions, on what they care about. All right. Donors should not just be giving you money. Tell them and believe that they are investing in a better future.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carol. That's a perfect note to end on, a real call to action there. Thank you so much. That was such a brilliant session, really interesting as a kind of person who has to fundraise but isn't a fundraiser for a charity. I found that really, really excellent. So thank you, Andrew, Laura, Louise and Carol. Thank you for people who attended live. I've posted the evaluation form in the chat, so please let us know what you thought of this session. Please also tell us other sessions that might be useful. All of our sessions are crowdsourced from people that attend Trustee Learning Programme sessions. I've also put a link in the chat to the rest of the Trustee Learning Programme. It's termly, it's all completely free. Thank you to our sponsors. So do have a poke around what else we've got coming up. We'd love a donation. Carol says if you don't ask, you don't get. So here I am. Yes, there's a donation link there. And do have a look at Getting on Board's website to see how else we can help. And then finally, a massive thank you to Rathbones Investment Manager. Thanks to them, this session was free of charge. So thank you all so much for coming. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.